Hello, everyone. Welcome to the University Michigan Museum of Anthropological Archaeology Brownback lecture series. So we're going to give some couple minutes to people keep joining us here, and also for people who are on Zoom. I'm going to start in a few minutes. Right. Hi again to everyone who's joining us in person and also by Zoom. We are moving to test in a hybrid setting to allow more people access this where people are in the field or former alumni. And we are going to try to see if this format works for the next round back. Well, our speaker of today is Dr. Marco Cavalazzi. He's a Marie Curie Fellow at the University of Bologna at Italy. He's currently conducting a research in the field of the landscape history and archaeology. His work focused on the transformation of the rural landscape, as well as the relationship between city and countryside in late antiquity and Middle Ages. Dr. Cavalazzi is also currently exploring new application for GIS technology in these fields of research. Today, he will present his work entitled Ravena Landscape Project, Wetland and Coastal Archaeology around the Byzantine capital. After the presentation, we will have some time to answer some questions with our speakers. For people that are joining us by Zoom, we ask that you keep your video off and audio muted and type your question in the Q&A box at the bottom to solve it later. Without more say, please welcome Dr. Cavalazzi, and thank you. The stage is yours. Thank you.
So thanks for the presentation and the invitation. As John said, I'm currently here at the University of Michigan within a joint project between the University of Michigan, the University of Bologna, and a new university in northern Portugal, University of Minho. This project deals more with the technical aspect of the landscape archaeology, so more the content is more related to the GIS application to landscape archaeology. But today I would like to focus more on the other aspect of my research, so the landscape evolution and analysis. In terms more of dialogue between human and environmental factors. The area of interest is the Ravenna countryside in northern Italy. Despite the presence of wetlands, Ravena Hinterland was densely populated at least since the Bronze Age. However, these settlements had to deal with the complex and difficult environment. In the picture, you can see one of these sites we are investigating, a medieval abandoned city, the city of Caria, that is more or less 2 dozens of kilometers south of the city of Ravenna. Cervia is really a good example of what I was saying. Here, a lagoon was transformed during the Middle Ages to be exploited for salt production. The cultivation of salt was so productive and so rich that a real city grew in the center of the salt ponds and became the capital of salt production in medieval Italy, under the control of the Ravenna elites. Today, I will discuss also the methodological aspects that archaeology must face dealing with this kind of landscape. The study of coastal and wetland landscapes is a challenge for archaeology because the high geomorphological dynamicity of this ecosystem limits the archaeological research. The Ravenna Landscape Project investigates systematically the countryside of Ravenna, a major Roman and medieval city that developed in a complex marginal landscape. The research tried to overcome these limits represented by this geomorphological complexity, as well as to introduce new approaches to the study of the local landscape. So today I will present the latest result of the project, as well as I'll try to discuss the methodologies applied. Ravenna is located in northern Italy on the Adriatic coast, in the southeastern corner of a floodplain of the River Po, that is the longest river of Italy. Historically, the Ravena Hinterland was a very wide area, extended from the Po to the region of the Apennine Mountains, which separates the Po plain from the other part of Italy. From the historical point of view, in the Roman and Byzantine Empire, Ravenna has always been a relevant urban center. In its history as a capital started in the 402 CE, when the Emperor Honorius moved the capital of the Western Roman Empire from Milan to Ravenna. This decision was taken for defensive purposes. Ravenna was surrounded by swamps and marshes, and it was easily defensible. Really a positive characteristic in a period in which the empire was threatened by peoples coming from beyond the border. However, Ravenna was also before that period a relevant center. It was federated town of the Roman Republic after it hosted the imperial fleet, and also remained during the Middle Ages a relevant urban center. Indeed, it was the city where the exarch lived, the military and political chief of Italy during the Byzantine period. In 2002, the University of Bologna started investigating the countryside around the city of Ravenna. At the beginning, it was simply a systematic artifact survey in the area south of the city, the number 2 in the map. From the 2009, the investigation was extended also to other areas in the inland, the number 3, and from the 2019, it has been included also the coastlands, the number 1 and 4. The widening of the project made the data collection and interpretation more complex because we started investigating not stable contexts from the geomorphological point of view, at least. Landscapes that changed drastically during the history, transforming from wetlands to agricultural lands and vice versa many times. Anyway, each sector of the Ravena Hinterland was peculiar from this point of view, with a different history made by a different interaction between anthropic and natural factors. That obviously forced us to adapt our strategy in approaching the study of the local landscape. And here in the picture number 3 and 4, there's an example of this dynamism. We are in the inner part of the Ravena Hinterland. In this construction site, the number 3, we documented this exposed section. The red dot indicates a grayish level 4.6 meters down. It is dated to the 11th century CE. A few kilometers far away from here, you can find a totally different geomorphological and archaeological situation with late antique sites on the surface. So we are talking about sites dates back to the 5th, 6th, and 7th century CE. As we know, the impact of the geopedological biases is well known by landscape archaeologists since the 1960s and the 1970s. However, such biases reach a tipping point in the case of alluvial floodplains, where the alluvial phenomena cross subsidence and cause a relevant growth of the ground level. These areas have been defined from an archaeological perspective as clay landscape with difficult soils. In addition to this, some of the investigated areas were wetlands reclaimed only recently for agricultural purposes. So the archaeologists that are set to work in this kind of environment must deal with the landscape that today is very different from the past. All these elements make the interpretation and synthesis of data more complex and more difficult. In this map, you can see an example of how the geopedological biases can affect the data collected. We are always in the inner part of the Ravena Hinterland, and this area was affected by several floods during the Middle Ages and the modern period. Below, you can see a digital elevation model of the area of interest. The higher part are the yellow, the reddish ones, and they are mainly related to fluvial ridges. Above, you can see a map that is a result of the interpolation of the dating of the scattered artifacts collected during a survey. The difference is sometimes related in dating to geomorphological factors, such as for the number 1 in the picture, where there was probably a fluvial breach during the late Middle Ages, or the number 2, where the dashed white line represents a fluvial ridge. But sometimes these differences are related to anthropic factors, such as in the red cluster at number 3, where the survey documented a medieval village. However, it's not always so easy to clearly understand this difference. This geomorphological dynamism was not at all a problem in the past. Sometimes wetlands and coastlands were considered by scholars as marginal landscapes. They weren't cultivated, so they were marginal and unproductive. This happened also for the mountain landscape. Nothing could be more wrong, and this opinion was determined by our modern perspective. Also, in an urban-centered and pretty agricultural society, as the Roman was, the wetlands were considered productive in the socio-economic system. We know that in wetlands and coastlands since the Roman period, there were productive activities, maybe seasonal, such as fishing, hunting, charcoal production, gathering, breeding, timber cutting, clay extraction for pottery and brick makers, commercial harbors, and everything was exploited in a very fluid relationship with the environment. We know that not only thanks to archaeology, the archaeological data. We must remember we are dealing mostly with an historical archaeology, so our consideration is supported also by recent sources analysis. And so, how can we approach the study of these landscapes? Where were these settlements that the written sources mentions? And what were their characteristics? How was the surrounding environment, and how these environments, these landscapes changed in the past, and why? And here is the big question. Do we need to investigate these marginal and complex landscapes? Is it worth the effort? And can we manage and interpret this complexity? During this year of research, I found different answers to these questions that pushed me to continue investigating this kind of landscape. First of all, from the historical point of view, it's clear that marginal was not at all marginal. This problem involves the evolution of the landscape perception during the history, in particular the non-agricultural landscape. So we are talking about woods, grasslands, wetlands, lagoons, and marshes. Second, the analysis of extreme environments helps in collecting meaningful data sets. For example, related to climate history, extreme event effects. Also, these more dynamic landscapes are the right place sometimes to investigate wide, complex social political changes, because sometimes here it's exactly where this transformation first caused visible changes. And third, marginal landscape, in particular lowlands, are a sort of empty landscape, are blank pages for people's settlement choices. Think of a place abandoned by man for a couple of centuries. That happened, for example, for the Ravena Hinterland after the end of the Roman period. The following alluvial events were able here to deposit almost 2 or 3 meters of sediment upon the Roman layers. So during the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, and the Middle Ages, all the Middle Ages, what people found of the Roman landscape? Ruined villas, trace of the drainage Roman system, nothing of that, probably. Nothing of nothing, probably, yes. And so these landscape are a sort of blank page for late antique and medieval people who decided how and where live freely, how to trace their drainage system, their fields, or where to build their religious buildings, not forcefully near a temple or a sanctuary, as happened often in the ancient Italy. In the second part of the lecture, I would like to talk more about methodologies and the kind typology of data collected. Not all the different parts of the Ravena Hinterland are similar from the geomorphological point of view. However, some of them share the same characteristics. The first example is related to the stable lowland and coastland. I'm talking about the areas I numbered 1 and 2 in a previous slide, south of the city of Ravenna. These areas were partially wetland, and part of the ancient lagoon and marshes still survives today. Anyway, these areas are the most stable of the Ravena Hinterland from the geomorphological point of view. This is due to the absence of relevant watercourses. This stability obviously helped the settlements to survive and grow. This is why an entire city, 20 kilometers south of Ravenna, grew almost out of nowhere. It is the city of Curie. As I said before, this settlement was born probably during the 8th, 9th century CE in the middle of a lagoon transformed into salt ponds. And as I said, this activity of salt production was so productive, so rich that an entire city grew in the center of the salt pond during the 10th, 11th century CE. You can see the salt pond, the location of Curie, and the pine wood on the coastland in an 18th century map on the left of the slide. And during that period, the 18th century, the city of Curie was completely transferred and built again a few miles eastward, nearer to the sea. And indeed, on the right of the slide, there is a picture of the area where the city of Curie was until that period, the 18th century CE, and it is the site we are currently investigating. In this kind of landscape, a traditional approach works well. Systematic artifact surveys Open area excavations, coring are enough to collect the data needed to reconstruct the landscape evolution. On the right of the slide, you can see the sample of an artifact survey in the countryside around the city of Cheria. The point distribution represents the location of the archaeological sites documented during the survey. Because of the thanks to the geomorphological stability I've mentioned before, sites from the Bronze and Iron Age are visible on the surface of the cultivated lands. But there is another element to consider. Very frequently in this situation, we documented long-term diachronic settlements. In the picture, you can see a Roman villa with Iron Age materials too, that was settled until the end of the Middle Ages, probably becoming a medieval village, or at least a clustered medieval settlement. This does not mean the site was settled without any break. It evolved, transformed in time, including possible breaks or pauses. This settlement stability created a so-called inherited landscape anyway. The medieval inhabitants of this stable part of the Ravena Hinterland did not live in a previously empty landscape. The previous settlement patterns influenced the following ones, and the ancient site attracted new population. But it was not always like that. As I said, as for example, in the area west of the city of Ravenna, where the geomorphological dynamism was stronger. I mentioned the blank and empty landscapes before. This western part of the Ravena Hinterland was characterized by a mixed environment since the Roman period. Still during the Middle Ages, as the written sources tell us, and as shown by the map on the left of the slide, the marshes were rounded by cultivated lands, but also semi-wet zone and woodlands. Since the Roman period, different parts of this zone were reclaimed, and today wetlands totally disappeared. In fact, as you can see from the picture on the right of the slide, this part of the Ravena Hinterland is currently and intensively cultivated and anthropized countryside. In this kind of dynamic landscape, unstable from the geomorphological point of view, can we be systematic anyway? I think yes, we can, but I think also we need to cheat a little bit. You can see on the left of the slide the samples of the artifact survey we are carrying out in this area since the 2009. We were systematic, yes, but without regularity. When we planned the sampling strategy, we defined the landscape strata, sort of landscape units according to different characteristics, geomorphological, natural, historical, archaeological characteristics of the area, at least analyzing the previously known data. But to each identified stratum, we applied a different proportion, coverage proportion, and a different strategy for shaping our samples. For example, we were regular only in the southern part of the area that is not totally stable from the geomorphological point of view, but at least is more stable than others. Or we did not include in the sample the areas that were wetlands until the contemporary age, or were reclaimed only in the modern and the contemporary period. These at least maximized our results. But in such complex landscapes, the artifact survey, geophysics, excavations are not enough. So we started also a systematic geoarchaeological research investigating the buried deposit through corings. On the right, you can see a map that includes all the sites we found during the survey, the red dots, and the previously known archaeological sites, the black dots. The green line represents one of the cross sections we produced. The result shows clearly how complex is the local situation. And here the cross section. 4 are the relevant sites, historical sites present in this section. 4 medieval fortified villages, highlighted in blue and called from the left to the right, Zagonara, Barbiano, Budrio, and Cotignola. This cross-section was a result of our archaeological investigation, open areas excavation in Zagonara, artifact survey, and obviously a set of a dozen of manual and mechanical cores. First, contrary to the appearances, this lowland is not flat at all. Since the Roman period, rivers created ridges and consequently depressions in a very complex succession of silty, clay, and sandy deposit, really clear in the cross section. And second, the fortified villages developed above the higher fluvial ridges. And Zagonara, the first on the left, is not an exception to this pattern. Today is included in a lower area, but during the late antiquity and the beginning of the Middle Ages, it was on the slope of this relevant fluvial ridge I've marked with the green dot. This is also why during the artifact survey near Zagonara, we found on the surface several archaeological sites dated back to the 5th, 6th, 7th century CE. It means that in these areas, there's a sort of geomorphological window where ancient layers are still visible on the surface. And finally, we moved to the last area we started investigating only recently. It was the 2021 when we started investigating the northern part of the Ravena Hinterland. This is really the most challenging context of the Ravena Hinterland for archaeologists. Really, these are complex clay landscape. As far as we know, no pre-modern sites are detectable on the surface. Medieval, Roman, and pre-Roman layers are buried deep down. Indeed, the area north of the city of Ravenna was a wetland until the 18th and 19th century CE. And it was bordered by several fluvial ridges to the north and the west, and the marine dunes to the east. But there have been settlements since the pre-Roman period, known thanks to written sources. Villages, roads, canals that linked the city of Ravenna to the north of the peninsula, medieval monasteries, temporary settlement in the coastal pine wood. That is a very particular woods because it was not natural, it was cultivated for timber cutting and for pine cones and pine nuts. So a very anthropized landscape. So we started testing approaches that were partially different. Here is an example. We crossed 2 different investigations to reconstruct the geomorphological evolution of the area. First, a mechanical coring. The core sample is in the slide, the upper right corner. And its location is also represented by a blue star in the map on the left. And the second investigation was an electromagnetic investigation, a geophysical investigation that creates magnetic fields that induce electrical currents to flow through the subsoil. In turn, these currents create a secondary magnetic fields that is detected and measured by the instrument. What was interesting in this core sample? More or less 4 meters deep, we detected a radical environmental transformation. A thin level of fluvial sand, the red dot in the core sample, divided levels of marine sand connected to a lagoon environment from a pit level connected to marshes. The C14 dating, the radiocarbon dating of the fluvial sand, gave more or less the beginning of the 3rd century CE, so the middle of the Imperial Age. And the result of the XRF analysis of the river sand was compatible with the alluvial deposit of the River Po. that during this period, the Roman and the medieval period was located near this point. So our hypothesis is that around the beginning of the 3rd century CE, a flood of the River Po was connected to a radical transformation of the local environment. The coastline went eastward, creating new dunes and closing the lagoons, which became marshes. This event seems linked also to a radical transformation that involved the city of Ravenna itself. It is not surprising that in the 5th century CE, a new harbor was built for the city, and the previous one, the Roman harbor, was totally buried and transformed into orchards. So geophysics here helped in making this data more systematic, covering quickly a wide area. You can see one of the cross sections obtained with the electromagnetic system in the slide in the right lower corner. The red layers are the one connected to the seabed and lagoon deposits, while above the yellow stripe is the pit level of the late Roman and medieval marshes. And the blue one above seems the clay deposits of the modern reclamation process. But this is still a partial result. We will carry on with the course geophysical investigation. So in conclusion, systematic approach always seems to be the right answer to deal with these complex ecosystem, such as the one where Ravenna was born. However, we need to adapt our strategy to a very dynamic landscape, considering the local geomorphological, historical, archaeological characteristics. However, our ultimate goal is to find the most effective solution. In more general terms, in the past societies, these marginal ecosystems were not marginal as we may think today. So we need to investigate them as much as we can and collect data set, not only for reconstructing the evolution of the past landscape in terms of interaction between anthropic and natural factors, but also for reconstructing the ancient perception of landscape. For example, investigating the concept of marginality, of inherited landscape, or of empty landscapes. In the next step, we will carry on with the systematic investigation in the different sectors of the Ravena Hinterland. However, I think we will soon face another challenge to find the right way to interpret such a complex data set composed by archaeological, paleo-environmental data, geoarchaeological, historical data. Let's see. And please, if you have any suggestion, make it to me. And yeah, thanks again for the invitation. And if you have any question, please ask me.
Thank you, Marco, for the nice and very technical talk. I'm sure the people here have some questions, suggestions to discuss. Also invite the people who are joining us through Zoom to type their questions or suggestions in the Q&A. So we're going to bring up that here. So, is there any questions, suggestions?
Yeah, I have just, and I may have missed it, but I have just a question on like the broader organization of the project.
Yep.
Because as far as I've understood, you're sort of working on the environmental landscape parts of it, but what are the other bits? And I understand that integrating them is not going to be very easy, but like what is happening?
The project is the result of was promoted by the University of Bologna. So first of all, was, as I said, an landscape archaeological project based on artifact survey and excavation. So it's sort of traditional approach at the beginning, and this is a part in which I'm involved more. But the other part are related more to the environmental reconstruction of the landscape and trying to integrate this part. So there's a part of the team that is working more on the archaeobotanical approach and also the geoecological approach. And the project was promoted by the University of Bologna, as I said, but it involved different researchers by different universities. So, for example, the University of Verona, the University of Ghent in Belgium, and yeah, the other part, and the University of Bologna is dealing also with the written sources analysis. So mainly the different pillars of this interpretation are composed by the archaeological data, the paleo-environmental data, analyzed both through the written sources analysis, but also the archaeological and eco-fact facts, and the geoarchaeological approach, so the reconstruction of the past geomorphology, more or less.
I heard you mention also archaeological excavation.
Yeah, exactly. So we try to apply sort of multi-scale approach. So we have also different excavation approach because we have both open areas excavations, so extensive excavation, but also less invasive approach, such shovel pits, for example, coring itself, and there's the part I think we need to improve, that is the off-site investigation, that currently mostly deal with coring and core samples, but I'm sure it's one of the positive approach we are dealing with, but sure we need to do more this part. So far is more related to the geoecological approach, so we are talking about hundreds of coring already done in the area, in the hinterland of Ravenna, specifically inside this project. This part is is coordinated by a PhD student of the University of Ghent, and I think the other part that, and the archaeobotanical part is now more related to the site approach and not to the off-site approach. For example, like adopting a pedo-anthropological approach, for example. So analyzing charcoal find in core of sites, for example.
So how you know this coring? How effective was coring as a site discovery?
Sorry?
How effective was coring for discovering sites in these dynamic environments where they're not visible?
So far is really searching in a haystack. Okay, that we know. So the consideration is different according to the area. This is clear because, for example, in the inland, coring is more effective because we are dealing with a very dynamic landscape, but with a lot of data, previously known data. So it's easier. And also coring is effective for finding archaeological traces, but randomly we're talking about. On the coastline, for example, the northern sector of Ravenna is really complex because we know more or less from written sources. So, for example, historical cartography where medieval monasteries were, but nobody found nothing about them, or at least something. But there's there's a lot to do more. So really here, a systematic approach is the only answer. And we just started, and probably carrying on this approach, we will find something also from the archaeological point of view. In the cross section we made with the electromagnetic analysis, we intercepted also an archaeological sites, but we knew about it before, so it's cheating.
Because the contrast
Again.
with North America and Europe is it's like you can't find a place in Europe where you push spade in the ground and you don't cover cultural material at one time period or another.
Sure.
Whereas here you can do that quite easily.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's even this kind of landscape where you have a long-term occupation, then once you've identified these very kind of layers,
Exactly.
then you can really see.
Sure. And obviously in the past there was plenty of hypotheses about the location of this or that, and always according mostly to this continuity. Anyway, I think that only this kind of data can tell us the right interpretation about this kind of archaeological sites and landscapes. Not hypothesis, not, for example, a morphological approach according to size, extension, or something like that, orientation of street and so on.
So this is the big change that you mentioned in the core, in the one core that you had,
Yeah.
where you get, lagoonal sort of
Yep.
near shore environments or sort of brackish environments that are changing to peat, like wetland bog like environments. So that I'm assuming just given the time frame you're operating, that's not a natural climatic sea level shift. That has to do with human engineering of the landscape, right? Or
We are not
what's your
sure.
explanation for that?
We are not sure. We are not sure about the causes. As far as we know, the 3rd century CE was a period of transformation caused by climate events, also in other part of the plan. So it's probably, but we need to do more about that. For example, investigating the anthropic structure nearby this area, or collecting more data, natural environmental data about the deposits above and below this level.
And the mouth of the Po, how far is it from that core that you extracted? The
Sorry.
current mouth of the Po River. How far is it from the core?
The mouth is, I think, something like 40 kilometers
Oh my
north.
God.
It's really a lot. Yeah,
That's
sure.
amazing.
Yeah, sure.
That's really.
And this change was anthropic. So during
Yeah, exactly. That's just crazy.
yes, that's great. Yeah, sure. So probably here we are talking about natural factors in the 3rd century BC, but it's plenty of moments, events that in which the man changed the path of a river, and this changing of the Po from this path to the modern or pre-modern one is human anthropic cause.
I have questions and also kind of comments. I get my attention when you say that we should think the marginal landscape like blank pages for people's settlement choice. And it's because geographers and ecological marginal environments, marginal landscape for places where it's not possible agriculture, but indeed wetlands are very productive. Or high altitude plateaus are also very productive, and we still having like this very kind of modern ethnocentric point of view. What is productive? What is marginal? And when we see those processes, how they even engineering the landscape, we are clearly seeing that is not marginal environments, and there's a long-term history of occupation. How that can be in a marginal environment. So, how is your approach to marginal environment?
I try to use these terms in a sort of objective way. So as today geographists use it, so not adapt to agricultural purposes, but it's all because the other perspectives that involves the productivity and so on, they are wrong. So we had in Europe, in Italy, different historians, archaeologists that already tried to use a correct approach to the concept of marginality, but there's a lot to do. And currently in Europe, the attention is more focused on the mountain landscape as marginal places. And because very often the lowland marshes, coastland are more complex. It's more complex to deal with this kind of environment from the archaeological point of view, because you need a lot of data sets to interpret in the right way. For example, in France, in Germany, there's a long tradition dealing with the concept of marginality, in particular in the mountain landscapes. Spain too, but lowland, marsh, wetlands have been a bit ignored from this point of view, I think. Yeah.
Actually, it's a first question. Thinking about the idea of marginality when we talk about wetland and marshland, there is one aspect that is problematic, which is I think of like several very big and flourishing sites in the history of archaeology that are near marshland that they exploit very successfully. So I don't know whether we should read about marginality in this context.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, do you have any information about Malaya?
Not so far.
Or reconnected for that area period?
Not so far. We are dealing with different contexts that might give us some information about this kind of situation. In particular, for example, Cervia is really a good example for this kind of data, because it was an urban center. So there's cemeteries, there's churches abandoned. So I hope in future we can have this kind of information.
That sort of reminds me, because we were in, was it Lesina? We were in Lesina this summer, town in Puglia, that reminds me a lot of these.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, obviously smaller, but sort of lagoonal, and full of mosquitoes and stuff.
Yeah.
And the town, we went there, it's a beautiful setting, but the town's one of the ugliest places I've ever seen in Italy.
Sure.
It's pretty astounding. Because it was destroyed by earthquakes multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
So all the buildings are like a hodgepodge of the last like 100 years, but most of it's sort of from the 60s and stuff. So I was just thinking about these big landscape changes you have and whether there's seismic activity that might explain some of these things.
Sorry?
Oh, sorry. I was thinking about these big landscape changes and wondering whether there's seismic activity that might explain some of it.
So historically, the Ravenna Hinterland is partially affected by this kind of problem. I think regarding more general terms, the difference between different wetlands areas, there are differences. For example, the Po Valley is not such healthy like other different coastland areas. And so, yes, surely the wetlands can be very different from one to another. Okay. Also considering such kind of phenomena like seismic and so on. And here, most of the problems are related to in the Ravena Hinterland, the management of the drainage system, management of water. We know about seismic events, but they are not the main problem of the city. Subsidence, so managing building may be that starting to collapse for this motivation. And also in the countryside, floods are the main problem. So managing extreme events and try to relationship with this kind of problem.
I know you mentioned the medieval villages being fortified. What fortifications do you see present in the villages there?
It depends on the period and the size. So here in this part of Italy, the first fortified settlements of the Middle Ages, and we are talking about more or less the 8th, 9th century CE, are characterized by wooden fortification, canals around the settlement, nothing more. Embankment is the right word. Embankment, and only after, from 11th, 12th century CE, we can see a different approach, and like for example, bricks building, something more complex. For example, Zagonara is an example of what we called Europe second generation in Castilian, the Castilian of second generation. So we are talking about the last wave of the Castilian process, that is the construction of castles. And probably Zagonara was characterized by a more monumental fortifications.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Oh, we have a question. Oh, yeah, please.
You have a lot of different organizations participating.
Yeah.
in this. Do you all use English to communicate?
There's a lot of Italian involved working abroad. So Italian is the most used. It's a problem of Italians to deal with English. Yeah, sure. But so yeah, they are mostly Italians. Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you, everyone, for coming for the question. Give another round of applause to Dr. Cavalazzi. So for everyone, this is going to be our last round back for this semester, but keep it tuned. We're going to resume this in the winter, the week of January, and thank you, everyone. Everyone have a good afternoon. See you. Thank you, gentlemen.